Hey everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Rock Daydream Nation. Today I've got a very special guest. This gentleman's name is Paul Newton, and he was the original bass player for Uriah Heep. So if you think of those early albums, very heavy, very humble, Salisbury, and look at yourself, this is the man who played bass and anchored the bottom end. Mr. Paul Newton, welcome to Rock Daydream Nation. How are you today?
I'm cool, Peter, thank you. Apart from Zoom playing up, as we've been trying to sort out, so I can't get the video part working. So, but it's probably a good idea if people can't see me.
Not a problem. Look, a pleasure to get you on the show. And look, I want to go back in time. Let's talk about pre Uriah Heep.
Right.
You started off with a progressive group called Shin, which
That's
featured the
correct.
organist Don Shin and the drummer Brian Blinky Davison. Um, Tell me, what was that like being your induction into rock and roll, playing with that band, anchoring the bottom end in that band?
Well, I mean, that was my first pro band. I'd worked with various local bands, like we all do when we're kids and youngsters. And it got to the point, I was at college trained to be a surveyor. But the band, we got this band Shin together from the remnants of a band called the Soul Agents in Southampton, close to where I lived. A band which at one time had Rod Stewart as the singer and whatever. And Don Shin was a keyboard player who was a kind of pre-Keith Emerson guy. Keith Emerson nicked a lot of his ideas. He was very bizarre, very eccentric, but an absolute genius on the keyboard, on the Hammond organ. And so my father, who was managing my little band at the time, got in touch with John, and we formed this band and started to get plenty of gigs. So it became my first pro band. It was slightly unusual for that kind of time in rock because we were a Hammond organ, bass, and drums with a guy singing. So we didn't have a guitar. I played a little bit of guitar on a couple of songs. And so that's how that sort of all came together. We did a lot of university gigs and stuff, but we weren't really, it was a sort of band, we were a bit ahead of our time, and it didn't really seem to be going anywhere eventually. And Brian got an invite from Keith Emerson to join a band called The Nice, who were at that time backing a singer called P.P. Arnold. So he went off, and the band split off.
Yeah,
And I went on to other things. After that, I joined a band called The Gods, which is where
yeah.
effectively.
I want to talk about that because the
Yeah,
Gods had some luminaries in that band, like Mick Taylor, Ken
that's correct.
Hensley, Lee Kerslake. You're in the band in 1967. What was it like playing with those guys?
Well, it was great. I mean, that thing came about because my father, we used to play at a place in London, the Starlight Ballroom, and the guy there who ran that managed this band, The Gods. And we did a gig up there. I'd done a gig up there with Shin, um, and Ken Hensley had come along because obviously being a Hammond player, he'd come along to see Don Shin playing. And then a few weeks later, when Shin split up, uh, Ken Hensley's manager, contacted my father, said, "Listen, the Gods have just split up. Ken's looking for a band. Do you think him and Paul would be interested in reforming the Gods?" So to cut a long story short, we got together, had a chat, and got on okay. We needed a drummer and a guitarist, and I knew Lee Kerslake from the semi-pro days. We very often bumped into each other at gigs, and we got on well together. Used to jam together. So we got Lee on board, and the first guitarist we had was a friend of Lee's, guy from Bournemouth, that Vic somebody or other. But he didn't really work out. So we got another guy in on guitar, a young bloke from London who can't remember his name now. Joey, I think it was Joey something or other. and he'd been playing with a British band called the Love Affair, who had a few hits. He came on board, but again, that didn't really work out. We did a gig in Bournemouth with the Gods, and there was a band there with a Polish guy, Joe Konis, playing guitar. And to cut a long story short, Joe came on board, and that was the sort of definitive lineup of the Gods. Um,
Absolutely unbelievable that you crossed over with all these cats that went on to bigger and better things, or became, you know, quite well known. With Mick Taylor, did you ever have an inkling that this guy had something special? Were you surprised when he joined the Stones, or it seemed quite logical because you recognised that this guy was one talented player?
Well, yes. I mean, I wasn't doing Mick Taylor. One of the reasons for the God splitting up was Mick Taylor had left to join John Mayall's Blues Breakers. So I didn't actually really work with Mick. He'd gone by the time I was on board. But I mean, I'd seen the Gods.
Right.
And yeah, I realised then that this guy was very talented, very quiet, shy man, but played wonderful guitar. And so, of course, John Mayall picked up on him, and that was the start of a very illustrious career for Mick, you know, until he eventually joined the Rolling Stones, which always seemed a bit strange to me. But of course, it was obviously a good paying gig for him, and got him worldwide stardom for a few years. So yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, a very talented guy, very, very talented man.
Yeah, absolutely. So the music the Gods were playing was kind of a little bit of prog rock, a bit of psych. Was this the sort of music that you were personally grooving on in '67?
Yeah, because the Gods, we were able to do 4-part harmonies, and Ken had started writing by then, so we gradually put some of Ken's compositions into the set. But we also we did 50% covers. I mean, it was the days of the Vanilla Fudge, You Keep Me Hanging On. We did a cover of that. We did a couple of other songs, old songs that we revamped in the sort of Vanilla Fudge style, the sort of, heavy driving Hammond organ, the 4-part vocal things, which we found that suited us. And as we gradually wrote more songs, we did this became the God Sound, which really was the sort of pre Uriah Heep sound. I guess that once we had Uriah Heep, we used a lot of those early influences in Uriah Heep music. But it was obvious right from the start that the God Ken, very, very difficult, strange band at times, but a great slide guitarist, a good Hammond keyboard player, a good vocalist. Ken was the lead singer in the Gods, and a great harmony singer as well. And we're starting to write good songs. Right from the start, I could see that this guy knew how to write songs. Very, very talented man. Very talented man.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So in 1969, you join up with Mickey Box and David Byron in Spice. Can you describe what it was like playing with those guys for the very first time?
Yeah, well, the Spice gig came about because, again, the Gods, it wasn't really going anywhere, and I was a youngster. I wanted to be moving forward, and the Gods, we were just doing the same gigs and whatever, but we couldn't. At that time, we didn't have a record deal. We did a bit of recording for a management company, did some demos, but nothing actually got released. And I saw an advert in the Melody Maker, but a London band, progressive band, wanted a bass player. So I answered the ad, went up to Essex in London, where these guys were, and that's where I first met Mick and David. I always remember that because the drummer at the time they had, Nigel Pegg, his father had a greengrocery business, so we actually did the audition in the back of the greengrocer's shop. It was one of those things, Peter. Before we even started playing together, we just had a laugh, and I thought, yeah, these guys, I'd work with these guys, and then we ran through, we jammed and played a couple of their songs, and it just worked right from the start. So, they gave me the gig, and that's
Yeah,
how it started.
absolutely. Isn't it a small world that you went from one band to the other, and in within those two bands, you were associating with people that were part of the Uriah Heep story. It's
Well,
quite
yes, but
a small world.
yeah, but I mean, I've always had a great interest in rock bands' family trees, and this is very common in bands. You'll get a guy in a band,
Mm,
he join another band, then he'll bring one of his former bandmates along. Because
yeah,
I think if you're looking, I mean, when I came into Uriah Heep eventually, we needed a keyboard player. We on the first album we used a session keyboard player, very good guy, but he wasn't really. He was a jazzer. I mean, he had a jazz band. He wasn't going to come on the road
mm,
with Uriah Heep. So I suggested Ken because I thought, well, I know Ken. I know I've worked with him. I know his talent. So rather than auditioning loads of other people, I got Ken to come along, and it just worked. And that was the definitive lineup for Heat then. We needed a Hammond player when we were going out on the road doing stuff from the first album, and Ken just slotted in.
what was David Byron like in those days? Did he have the fully formed rock persona yet?
Yeah, Dave. Yeah, when I first met Dave, you get vibes off people, and he just had that. Although we were totally unknown, the Spice were totally unknown, he had that charisma. He was a very, very good front man. Had a wonderful voice. I mean, he used to do session singing or whatever, and Mick did a bit with him if they needed a bass player, guitarist for the session. But Dave just had it. Very, very confident on stage. As a man, he was quite shy in those days. Um, but because I mean, I'd moved up to London by then from where I lived in Hampshire, um, and I got a bed sit or whatever. And to start with, we were doing a couple of gigs a week if we were lucky. So we were earning a lot of money. I think Mick still had a job at the time. Um, but we used to socialise a lot. We got on very well, not just as musicians, as people. And in those days, we used to go around London to the pubs and clubs. And if we weren't gigging, we'd go out and watch other bands. I mean, back in those days, before the days of the great big stadium gigs, you could go to all these venues and see people like Free, we all did the same gigs. I remember back in must have been late 68, 69. We went to a gig in North London, and there was a band on there, Led Zeppelin. One of their first gigs. I think they were called the New Yardbirds at the time. But it was in the days you could go and see all these people at your local venue. Wonderful, wonderful days. So I mean, David and Mick and myself, we just you know, as well as gigging, we spent a lot of time together. We in those days we were just good friends, good mates, making and used to go, enjoying going out making our own music.
Yeah, fantastic memories. Can you explain how you got the recording deal and put out the first album, Very Heavy, Very Humble, in 1970? How did you get the recording deal?
Oh, sure. How that happened was because my father, all through my career up to then, my father had managed the bands. He used to run a ballroom in my hometown in the days when we had ballrooms. He'd book the bands into this place. So he would get reciprocal booking. He'd book one guy's band and that guy would book us. So he always managed to get us loads of work. But as things went on, with Spice became Uriah Heep, he realised that we need professional management to further our careers. And he'd send out, flyers and things, contacted people. And eventually, Jerry Braun's company, Braun Artist Management, came back, said they were going to send a talent scout to a gig in a place called High Wycombe. And this guy came along, reported, gave us a good report, and we went up to have a meeting with Jerry Braun, and he gave us a management and recording deal, um, which was which was um, which was great. But we signed all this stuff, of course, being young and naive. We signed for very poor percentages, but that was the way it's always been the way in the rock world. But it gave us the opportunity, it gave us loads of studio time. We were getting loads of work. I mean, Jerry Braun Agency, they handled various people, more pop type artists like Manfred Mann, Gene Pitney. But we spent a lot of time in the studio, and that's how the first album came about. We just always recorded, we weren't working. Um, and then we started using this session keyboard player. And about 2/3 of the way through the album, that's when I got Ken on board. So he finished off the rest of the album with us. And
Right.
some of the songs that we'd already recorded, Ken put his harmonies on, or a bit of guitar or whatever. So um, that was Ken wasn't with us for all of that album, but he was there for 2/3 of it, and that was the first album with some Old Spice songs. It was "Come Away, Melinda," which we'd always done on stage. So that it was formative years. We were finding our way. It's quite diverse, the sort of selection of material on that album, which but it was still the progressive rock days, so it kind of fitted in. You had a fair bit of scope in those days to do, different varied material.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got to ask you a question. Three drummers: Ollie Osson, Alex Nair. I don't. Sorry if I've got the pronunciations wrong. And Keith Baker. Yeah, and Keith Baker. Why three drummers? What's the story there?
Well, when I first joined Spice, they had a drummer called Nigel Pegram. Um, but as we started sort of moving along with the music, and Nigel wasn't really. We wanted a sort of more heavy drummer, and he eventually ended up in Steel Eye Span. That was his kind of music, so he wasn't that happy with what we were doing. So we put an advert in the Melody Maker, which was the musician's Bible back in those days. And some guys came along, and Alex Napier came along, and amongst other people, Alex got the job. He was doing what we wanted. Uh, guy, he was a Scottish guy, came from Glasgow, a real tough, hard man, but a great drummer. And I struck a very good friendship with Alex. He got on very well with myself, and my father, who was managing us, loved it because they were fairly straight talking people, both of them. So they got on well. We had Alex, and he did all the drumming on the first album, apart from two songs. But it got to the point. Alex, we did realise when we gave the job, he was actually. He told us he lived with his sister and whatever. I used to pick him up where he lived in Dulwich. And there was all these kids, but he was married with 4 children. And as started to progress, he was finding it difficult because we weren't earning a lot of money, and he needed to be earning a bit more money and could really sort of give us the time needed for the work we were doing. So, he decided to leave, and we put another advert in the Melody Maker. And amongst the drummers that came along was Keith Baker, who played with a guy called Dave Clemson in the Bakerloo Line, a well-known British blues band.
Right.
He's got the gig. There was one drummer came along. Guy ended up playing with Wings. I can't think his name at the moment. It'll come back to me a minute. But anyway, Keith got the drum for the job. And Keith was a great, great drummer. Very, very quiet, polite guy. But I mean, his drumming on the Sultry album, especially on Sultry, was outstanding. But
Yeah.
then, as time progressed, Keith had a bit of a demanding girlfriend, and it was again one of these things. We were working a lot by this time. We were a lot of work in Germany and in Europe. And it got to the point Keith decided to leave because he just didn't. He was getting tongue tied from the missus, and he didn't really want to be on the road as much as we were. So he decided to leave. And then we got Ian Clark, the drummer, on Look at Yourself again through an advert in Melody Maker. That's how both bands got there. You know, if you wanted somebody, you advertised on Melody Maker. So that was it. So I mean, from my point of view, as the bass player, the rhythm section, keep changing drum. You just get used to one guy, and then a few months later, you was gone. But that's rock and roll. You know, you get over these things.
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be challenging for you because every drummer's got their own style. Some's more groove, some, is a bit more four on the floor. I guess it's something that you'd have to acclimatize each and every time. But the recording of the album, Very Heavy, Very Humble, was that a fast recording process, or did it take a little bit of time to lay down the tracks? From memory.
It took a fair bit of time because, I mean, what was happening, Jerry would give us some studio time, and we'd go in and record one or two songs, and then they'd be put, the idea was to get an album together, but we did a lot of recordings until we eventually were happy that we had enough what we thought were good songs to make it a good album. So that happened over a good few months. It was a gradual process and a learning process all the time. When we first went to the studio, we hadn't done a lot of recording before. We'd done a bit with a United Artists. That Spice had a deal with United Artists when I joined, and they had a single come out, a song called "What About the Music," which was almost a sort of disco soul thing. But they'd given us studio time. We got in and put some of our own songs down. But to be honest, they weren't the strongest of the songs, so they never saw the light of day. But once we got into the studio, with Spice and Jerry Brown, we started to be, between us writing some what we thought at the time were reasonable songs, like good songs, and until we had enough, but to say, right, we got the album now. And adding Ken to them, was the icing on the cake.
Look, I've been listening to the album recently, and it does sound quite fresh. Sounds very well produced. Jerry, was he a bit of a taskmaster in the studio, getting you to, come on, guys, let's do it again and again until you get it right?
Jerry, because we were young and not relatively inexperienced, Jerry was a bit like being with a school teacher. He was an arrogant man, very opinionated, and so he really dictated for the early days recording. He pretty well dictated what he wanted us to do, and we had no option. He'd given us the deal, and it was like, well, okay, Jerry, he's an experienced guy, but Jerry probably knows best. So he was an important part of what happened on Very Heavy, Very Humble. He really made the decisions of what went on the album and what didn't. But looking back, the Very Heavy, Very Humble album, I think, is a great album because it's a diverse selection of material on there, which was representative of what we were doing at the time on live shows.
A number of the songs off that album are kind of live staples right to this day, like Gypsy, for example. Rolling Stone magazine, Melissa Mills, the famous, the infamous review.
Yeah.
If this group makes it, I'll have to commit suicide. From the first note, you don't want to hear any more. Boy, oh boy. Did the band have a bit of a chuckle when they read that review, or did they take offence to it?
No. I mean, we wisened up by then. The thing is with Uriah Heep and the first album, Jerry Brown had a big publicity campaign because the name came about because he was interested in getting us into the American market. And Uriah Heep is a character from Dickens' book David Copperfield. And it was the Charles Dickens centenary year back then, so he thought it would be a good marketing ploy, especially for the States. And we spent a lot of money on press coverage, adverts, and whatever, to get the name out there. A big record launch at Ronnie Scott's club in London. But because of that, the music press pretty well took against us. We were classed as a hype, Uriah Heep, the super hype band, because of the publicity. But, if you don't publicise something, nobody knows it's out there, do they? But no, we got slagged off and did for many years. The press, when we were on the way up with Spice and very earlier days, the press loved us because the British press are like this for a lot of things. They always support the underdog, and then and help you get successful. When you start to get successful, then they slag you off because you sold out. You can't win. But I mean, so we used to get, excuse me, we used to get these awful reviews, whatever. But I mean, we knew what we were doing. We knew what we wanted to do, so we just used to laugh it off. If you start taking these things to heart, then
in the early 70s was the rise of hard rock. Bands like Zeppelin, Purple, Sabbath. Was that an inspiration or an influence for some of the harder songs on this album, or some of the hard songs that you guys were working on in Uriah Heep?
Well, I think we all get influenced, especially as young guys. I mean, we all sit down. I sit in my bedroom learning to play guitar and bass, whatever. So you listen to all these people. So of course we are influenced by various sources of music and different genres, whatever. And this probably comes out in the songs, especially if you're writing your own songs without realising it. You're picking up on a fear or something that's impressed you and you've listened to. So, and that goes for all bands. Everybody is influenced by something.
So Salisbury was a bit of a slight change of direction, even more progressive, and it was the song Salisbury, written by Mickey Box, David Byron, and Ken Hensley, 16 minutes and 20 seconds, a bit of a symphonic rock.
Salisbury was actually 3 separate songs joined together. And we were investigating all sorts of avenues. I mean, the Salisbury album, bit of a strange album. There was all sorts of different things on. But the Salisbury thing came about. I mean, when I was with Shin, in Don Shin, Don taught me. He was a big jazz player back in the day. So he used to teach me bass lines on the bass pedals on the Hammond, which is how I sort of got into the jazzy thing on the middle section in Salisbury. That it was just a jam in the key of C. But as Salisbury was 3 songs joined together, and I mean David's vocals on that were absolutely outstanding. It was just he showed off his talent amazingly, as did most of the songs he worked on. So that was it was a bit of an experimental album, Salisbury, because you had something like Salisbury, then Bird of Play, just a straight ahead rocker, Ken's song The Park, very quiet, peaceful song. And Salisbury was the first time that Ken's songwriting sort of started to take over. He got his feet under the table then, and he was writing, prolific songwriter by then.
Ken had a bit of a reputation of being very focused and driven, and very steely in that sort of sense. A lot of ambition, maybe not as collaborative with other band members. That's the feedback I've read in a lot of interviews. Were you starting to see that with Ken? Very one vision, kind of taking control from start to finish.
Yes, I mean that became evident once Ken was established in the band. Uh, I really we all realised, myself particularly, Ken was really only out for Ken, which is any successful artist, that's how they are. If somebody's got a lot of talent, they're usually pretty single-minded about it, very demanding. So Ken was difficult to work with, because he wanted perfection in his songs, and I fully understand that. But Ken was never really a band member. He wasn't part of the clan as regards anything but music. I mean, he didn't socialise with us very often. He would very often travel on his own. When we were touring, he'd go and shut himself in his hotel room, be writing songs and whatever. You didn't see a lot of him. And excuse me, Peter. And unfortunately, as time went on, he started to get heavily into cocaine and cannabis. And so he became a Jekyll and Hyde. Ken could be charming one minute and absolutely vile the next minute. And that's how he was, and that's what drugs does to people, you know. So,
Yeah.
but I always say, without Ken Hensley, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I mean, Ken was the strength and the weakness of the band, with his time there.
Yeah.
But he'd also, Jerry Braun realised his talent very, very soon. So Ken and Jerry Braun formed a kind of alliance and were doing things that we didn't know about. Ken had various deals going on with Jerry, and he always seemed to have more money than the rest of us. He'd turn up with a new guitar and whatever. That's rock and roll, you know.
Yeah. So would it be fair to say very heavy, very humble? It was a band democracy.
Yes.
Salisbury, Ken starting to become the band leader, but not quite fully formed. And by the time at Look at Yourself, he was fully fledged, the alpha leader of the band.
Yeah, you're pretty correct there. Yeah. Ken, bit by bit, him and Jerry, it almost became the Ken Hensley band. I think it's fair to say. And I mean, there were times when I was in the band, because Ken seemed to thrive on dissent. I mean, at one time he called me up and what you wanted to get rid of Mick Fox, because Mick he's very theatrical on stage. And Ken said, he said it's just like the Morecambe and Wise show, you know, a couple of British comedians. He wanted to get rid of Mick, partly so he could play more guitar himself, maybe.
So get rid. Just to be clear, get rid of Mick, and he is the primary guitarist in the band, or get somebody else in.
Well, get somebody else in, but I don't know. He wanted to get rid of Mick, and then that kind of died away. And then as David became more and more flamboyant, he wanted to get rid of David at one point. Ken didn't like anybody who threatened his strength or him. He didn't like any competition. He didn't want anybody to hate ego him.
Yep. Before I go on to Look at Yourself, just want to close out about Salisbury, because it is a fascinating song. What was it like recording with the orchestra? Did that take quite a while to get it all set up? Lots of takes. Describe the scene in the studio. Were you right in the studio with this orchestra, or you recorded your parts separately?
No, Salisbury. Because when we first got it together, we started to do it on the live shows. Uh, so when it came about to record it on this in the studio, which took us a bit of a time, we recorded it as the band, and then when we completed it, Jerry had the idea of adding the orchestration to it, which we ummed and ahed about it. But anyway, he had the final say. So he got these guys in, a guy called John Fiddy, who was a session bass player. He wrote all the scores and everything out, and the orchestra came in, and you know, I don't know how long it took because we weren't there for a lot of it. I mean, I personally wasn't present for a lot of the orchestration parts. We'd done our bit. I don't think Jerry was that interested in the rest of us being there. I mean, I can't clearly remember. It's a long time ago, Peter.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
I would imagine Ken would have been there for a lot of the time, but I was never keen on the orchestration idea, to be honest, because it worked as just with the band playing it. But
Yeah.
I can see Jerry's logic. It added a bit of colour. And I think it came about because Deep Purple had brought an album out, Deep Purple in rock. So I think Jerry thought that it might be good for us.
Yeah. I understand. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, who were you playing with? So describe Uriah Heep. They're going out on tour. They're touring behind Salisbury, and maybe go back a bit further. Very Evil, very Evie, very Humble. What sort of tours were you guys on? Who were you playing with?
Well, we weren't touring with a lot of other bands. Back in those days, Peter, the British university scene was very vibrant. All the big universities in the UK used to have balls and 1 or 2 day events. So, I mean, we would get booked into all these different universities, and you turn up and they'd be us, Deep Purple, Jethro Tull in what playing on, and then the next night it would be a jazz night. Say there were musical events, but we weren't touring together. But we would do the university circuit and the various other venues, ballrooms and venues in the UK. And we would turn up and you'd find Deep Purple were heading the bill or whatever. So there was a mix and match, but most venues back in those days would have 2 or 3 bands on because it was the heydays of rock music and it was well supported. So they could afford to do all this, have all these bands on. But we didn't. The only actual tour in my time we did a tour of the UK. An American band, rock and roll band, Sha Na were headlining. So it was Sha Na, Uriah Heep, and there was a British band called Paladin who were on that tour. So we toured the UK with that show. We were all on a bus, sharing hotels and whatever. So that was an actual proper tour, but that was the only tour with other bands we did. All the rest of the time we would just get in and we'd have support bands or whatever at the venues we turned up at.
Yeah, that's a mighty eccentric lineup there, Paul. Touring with Sha Na Na.
Yes, I know. It was a bit odd. But
Yeah.
you see, the first time when we went to the States in 1971, we did 6 weeks in the States. First time the band went there. And we did a lot of gigs with the American band Three Dog Night, who in those days were massive. I mean, Three Dog Night were a sort of more of a pop band. You couldn't have found 2 more different bands than Uriah Heep and Three Dog Night. But that's the tour that Jerry got for this. Because Jerry Braun he never quite understood Uriah Heep because he'd always dealt with more straight ahead pop, excuse me, pop artists, people like Manfred Mann, Gene Pitney, Richard Barnes, whatever. So he never quite understood, in my opinion, what we were trying to do. And he was only really interested in the sort of 4-minute songs that would make us feel that he was a singles man. So we were an album band, and he didn't ever quite get the hang of that, which
Yeah.
surprised me when he let us put out, the Salisbury Suite, because that didn't fit into his box at all. He was a 4-minute band.
Mm.
Uh,
Well,
yeah,
I
go
mean
on.
the next album is arguably Heap's masterpiece, in my opinion. Look at Yourself in '71. What was the idea to have the album released so soon after Salisbury? Salisbury was released in January, and Look at
Yeah.
Yourself came out in July. Why such a quick turnaround?
Well, the thinking there was that Salisbury, we knew Salisbury had been a bit of an experimental thing, and at the time, it didn't really work for us. It didn't hit the spot for the record buyers. Over the last 20 years, that's totally changed. I mean, Salisbury has sold more or been more popular over the last 20 years than it ever was for the previous 30. But at the time, we realised we needed to get back on what Heap were about, which was, it wasn't heavy metal, that hadn't been invented at the time. It was progressive and then heavy rock. And we got together we Ken and the band, we got this collection of songs that ended up on Look at Yourself. But we wanted to get that out pretty quickly to actually re-establish what Uriah Heep was doing, because Salisbury didn't really do that. And I think Look at Yourself, which is a great album. I mean, not just that I played it. It's a great album, some great songs. I mean, you've got July Morning, which is probably the best song Heap have ever done. So
Yeah,
it was a
no
great
argument there.
song. And it marked, we'd established where we realised that was the Uriah Heep sound. The sound on that album was far better than the previous two. Partly because by then we had more say as to what we did in the studio. I mean, for me personally, the first couple of albums, because I always played with my fingers. But Jerry insisted I use a plectrum, a pick on the first two albums. Excuse me, which I was never quite comfortable with, because I always played to finger style. But anyway, he
Mm.
was at the time. But no, Look at Yourself. That was the start of the definitive Uriah Heep sound. The power chords, the roaring Hammond organ, a good thumping bass, and the beautiful harmonies that the Uriah Heep always done. So that was a milestone in the band's career, and pretty well set a precedent for what people then would expect from Uriah Heep.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. If there wasn't this album, you wouldn't get Demons and Wizards, or for
no,
that matter, the Magician's Birthday. Hey, I want to talk about July Morning, because that's like, I guess it's like Heap's Stairway to Heaven or Child in Time. The Dave and Byron vocals on that song are quite remarkable.
yeah.
And he does this falsetto that's just outworldly. Was that a tough recording session for David? Was he really put through the ringers? Because it is a really a lightning in a bottle vocal performance.
Recording wasn't tough for David, because David always knew what he wanted to do. And and so he wouldn't relax till he got his vocals as good as he could get them. And David had a wonderful range. He could get those high notes, but he had wonderful phrasing. He was just a natural, and he didn't really have to work at it. He always knew what the end result, what he wanted, and he
Where
wouldn't
it was
relax.
going, where it was going to.
Yeah, he knew what he was aiming for, because he'd do a couple of takes and we'd say, "Well, that sounds bloody good." No, no, it didn't. And he'd say, "No, I just need to do one more. I didn't quite get such and such a note right." So he was a perfectionist.
In that
Yeah,
song, the bit where he goes into the falsetto, and it's really, it's kind of almost like a banshee falsetto. Did you find that surprising when you first heard him do that within the song?
nothing surprised us with David, but of course, when you listen back and you've done it and you listen back, you sit back and think, Christ, how did you do that, David? You know, it was just remarkable. He could just do things. We used to say his voice, because you had the mellotron keyboard at the time, where we used to say David's voice is like a davatron. You know, he was just remarkable. And, he was just a one-off, beautiful vocals.
The album's got a lot of emotional depth, a lot of gravity, especially in the lyrics. July Morning, obviously, Tears in My Eyes, Shadows of Grief, What Should Be Done. Um, was there a lot of personal issues happening in the band? Because it seemed there's a lot of emotional gravitas, especially in this album, in the lyrics.
Well, I mean, look at yourself, it's basically all Ken's songs. So I think Ken wrote very, very good lyrics, but I think Ken's lyrics were a bit of an insight into his mind, his state of mind at any one time. They were quite deep, very personal to him. But the Ken's songs, I mean, July Morning tells a story, which is wonderful. I mean, I love Bauman, I love the Eagles because their songs tell stories. British band Squeeze, the song tells a story. So many rock songs are just fairly banal, simple lyrics, anything that rhymes. But Ken was a very thoughtful composer, and always was all his life. I mean, his lyrics were very often like poems put to music.
Did
And
you
it's funny. I mean, just what we're talking about, July Morning. It was a song Ken brought along to several rehearsals. It was just the basics, just played on acoustic guitar, and we could never make it work as a band sing for ages. And we eventually we'd be rehearsing routinely new material, and somebody would say, "Oh, let's have another go at July Morning." And we just hit the spot one day. We were rehearsing in London, a place in Covent Garden. And I'd been listening to Deep Purple, Child in Time, and I said, "How about if we do, say, copy it, but get it up with the sort of the theme of that?" And I started doing on the bass, doom, doom, doom. And that's how it came together. It totally changed from how we'd originally approached it. But it just suddenly came together in about an hour in a rehearsal hall. And we said, right, next time we're in the studio, we'll bang that one out. And when we did record it, that was done in one take. Strangely enough, we played it, and we listened back, and Ken wasn't too happy with the keyboard solo, but there are little mistakes in it. So we did it 3 or 4 times, but we didn't capture that same feel. It just didn't work quite as well. So we kept the original recording, and that's what went on the album because it captured the emotion and the feel, and none of the subsequent. It very often happens in a studio. You'll do take after take after take, and bit by bit, you start to lose it. It might become more musically correct, but you lose that emotion and feel because you start to get fed up with it.
absolutely? Well, it's certainly a masterpiece, and it's regarded as Heap's touchstone song, and again, part of their song set right to this very day. Um, were you noticing changes within the band, either on an interpersonal level or otherwise?
Yes, but I think this is common with anything in life. We've been working very, very heavy schedules. If we weren't out on the road, we were recording or doing photo shoots or God knows what. Um, and the friendship that I'd known in the early days of Spice and Uriah Heep, egos and business matters take over, and we weren't the mates we'd been previously. And I think again that's common with all many walks of life, certainly music. Um, Once something becomes a business, the attitudes change, egos kick in. Are you still there?
I'm still here.
Can you? That's all right. No, I just had a glitch here. So things change. Excuse me. Ken was very heavily into drugs by the look at yourself time.
Yeah.
David was starting to drink a lot.
Right.
And this affects your relationships in the band, and certainly for me and Ian Clark, I was in a place where I loved the music, but I didn't like anything else about it. There was atmosphere, bad atmosphere in the band. It was split into different camps, you know. And Mick was on the fence trying to keep everybody happy. Ken was away with the fairies most of the time. David was just, he got to the point he was coming on stage with glasses of wine and champagne, whatever. I mean, he wasn't as bad as he became later, but it was the start of bad habits and excesses, ruining the band.
Why did you leave the band?
Um, I got fired. I mean, because of all that, I got called into I got a phone call from the Ron's office. Said, can you come into the office tomorrow, whatever time? There's a bad meeting. We used to have bad meetings regularly. And I got up to the office, because I thought it was odd. As I was walking up to the office, Ken was just coming out. He just said, I'll see you a bit later. Go get some fags or something. And I went in. Jerry called me into his office and basically said, listen, Paul, we've decided to replace you. And he gave me £40, which was 2 weeks' wages at the time. We were on a wage with the band. And that was it. I walked out of the office and never saw any of them again for 30 years.
Explanation as to why you were being replaced?
Yes. I mean, there was an issue which my father, when he sort of handed the band over to Jerry Broad in the early days, there'd been an agreement between them that my father would be reimbursed for some of it, because he spent a lot of money on the band. He bought us a truck, he bought us equipment and whatever. He subsidised the band. And the agreement he had when he signed us over to Braun was that he would get some of that investment back. And Jerry Braun never ever paid anything for that. And my father was getting a bit edgy and fed up with this. So he started a legal proceeding. And of course, I was stuck in the middle. I had loyalty to my father and loyalty to the band. And I think Jerry and Ken thought, well, the easiest way to get out of paying anybody, Mr. Boss, is to get rid of Paul, and that will be the end of it. But I mean, I was exhausted from the touring, and we were on the roads. I mean, for the last 12 months I was with the band, we've probably done 300 shows all over the world, and it wears you out. We just didn't have any time to gather our breath or do anything, you know. And that when you're stuck with, we've got 5 guys traveling the world together in buses, coaches, planes, hotels, whatever. I mean, it wears a bit thin, because you just get no space. You have no space, and you've got pressure on the time to be doing all this work or whatever. And it doesn't make for a good working environment. So, I mean, I got fired, but I'd have probably quite possibly have quit at some point, because by the time I was fired, we had another 12 months, the long tours of the States, Australia, or whatever. And I had realised by then, Peter, that much as I love music, play music, much as I love the Uriah Heep music, I just didn't enjoy the constant touring. It just wore me out. So, I mean, that's how that happened. And I bear no grudge. I mean, that's rock and roll. You know, I had some good years out. It traveled the world, great experience. They fired me, but I probably would have left anyway. I just fed up with it.
And you got to play on three of the signature albums. I mean, the music you laid down is being enjoyed by multiple generations. Um, After you left the band, did you sort of from afar take an interest or see what Heap were getting up to, or did you just keep a distance? You just wanted to the chap.
No, I had I left the band. I got fired from the band, left the band, and that was a segment of my life finished. It's like any job, whatever you do in life. You quit one job and go to another one, and that's the past, you know. So I mean, I didn't really take any interest in what Uriah Heep were doing. I mean, I used to read odd things about them. I was very sad when I heard that David had died, and then I heard that Ken had left. But I mean, I didn't really have any reason or interest. I moved on to other things by then. You know, that part of my life was over.
Yeah, absolutely. They seem to have multiple lineups, and any time the band had a bit of chemistry, the lineup would change. Do you think that was one of the reasons that they never sort of broke into the big league, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, that's yeah, that's the story of Uriah Heep, isn't it? Constant changes. I mean, they did have what they call the classic lineup, which is what most people, Uriah Heep fans, always say is their favourite era. That was when it was Ken Mick, David Barr, and Gary Sane, and that's what they call the classic lineup. But once that had gone, they were never quite the same again. They had various. Well, I mean, losing David was, in my opinion, an absolute major blow for the band. But you know, he was in such a poor state of health and an alcoholic by then. I guess they had no choice. Um, I don't know whether that could have been whether they could have helped him more. I don't know. But yeah, they had their 2 or 3 years when they were in the big news in the States, whatever. But then David got his problem. Gary Sane had a terrible heroin addiction. I mean, a wonderful bass player who degenerated into just a drugged up wreck. You know, very, very sad. And he died very young. Wonderful bass player, but wonderful understanding the scales and bass lines, whatever. On a good day, Gary was the best. Towards the end, he just lost it because of drugs. The dreadful thing that happens when people get onto drugs. And then over the subsequent years, Ken was running out of steam songwriting, and just hyped up on drugs all the time. So he eventually quit the band. And then for some years after that, I mean, you're right, he almost ceased to exist because they put out album after album. Of, I mean, I didn't listen at the time, but having heard stuff later on in his life, they weren't great albums because they lost their songwriter. And instead of getting a decent songwriter writing songs, they were writing their own material, which wasn't good. I mean, you have to be honest about that. In the last few years, with Davey Rimmer and Russell Gilbert in the band, they actually sang and recorded now, like the Uriah Heep I remember. But they had some very, very tough years, and it was only Mick's tenacity that held the band together. I mean, a lesser person would have walked away and done something else. So I have great respect for Mick for keeping this going.
Yeah.
I mean, because when we formed the band in '69, whatever, none of us could have thought that could envisage 55 years later there'd be a
Yes,
Uriah Heep out there touring and recording and one original member in it. I mean, in those days, if you got a couple of years out of a decent band, that was it. Then you were back to work.
absolutely. Before we wrap up the interview, tell us what it was like to reunite with Mick 30 years later. The first time you laid eyes on him after all this time. What was it like for you?
Well, it was this began. I mean, so I had nothing to do with any of it for 30 years. And I remember it was back in 1999 or 2000. I got home from work and my wife said, "Oh, a guy, John Lawton, it's so much you to call him back." I mean, I'd never met John Lawton, but he was the singer who took over from David Byron. So I phoned John up and I said, "Oh, John, I thought we never spoken before. I never met the guy before." And he said, "Well, I phoned you, Paul." He said, "I've been in touch with Ken. Ken lived in the States at that time. And he's coming over. We're going to do like a review. We do a show in London for the British fan base. Me and Ken and a couple of other guys from John's band. Do you want to join us and come and play bass?" And I said, "Oh," I said, "that's out of the blue, John." I said, "To be honest, I don't know." I said, "There's bad blood between me and Ken." I said, "I don't know if I could be asked to do that. You know, I don't know if that will work." Anyway, to cut a long story short, Ken contacted me and could we rebuild Reading and all this stuff. So I did the show in London, and it was recorded when we had a mobile. It was recorded, and it was great fun. And that was it, just a one-off. And then it came about people, mainly the Scandinavia fan club wanted us to go over and do a similar thing there. So to cut a long story short, we had this band which became Uriah Heep, Ken Henderson, John Lawton, Lee Kerslake, and myself, four ex-members there. So by that time, we were more reasonable than the mixed touring band. So we did that stuff. But I mean, Mick never had any involvement in that. And it was only 2019, I think, out of the blue, I got an email from Mick. Well, we had odd email contact, but nothing much. It just, whatever. He said, "We're doing a show, a festival in the Czech Republic, and the promoters asked if we'd like to get a few ex-members up on." He said, "So your name came up first." He said, "You fancy doing it?" So in 2019, I found myself standing on a stage in front of 60,000 people with Mick Fox. The first time we've done that since 1971.
Isn't it amazing how the world turns?
Yes. Oh, it is. I mean, oh, that was interesting. I mean, John came along. Lee Kerslake was due to come, but he was so ill with cancer by then.
Yeah.
He made it. So, and I'm sad that the Uriah Heep Legend band that we had sort of for occasional shows within 12 months during COVID, nothing to do with COVID. Lee succumbed to his cancer, which he had for 5 years. John died very suddenly from an aneurysm, and then Ken died. He was taken ill and died from sepsis 3 days later in hospital. So suddenly, our Uriah Heep Legend band was no more, and we lost. They'd lost three of the most important members of Uriah Heep.
Yeah.
Very sad. Very sad.
Absolutely. Well, there's still a few of yous out there through the various lineups, and I know that Uriah Heep are doing their final lap. If they play England and Mickey Box asks you to come on stage, would you be open to playing a few numbers with them?
Yeah, quite possibly, but I don't think that was. It's most unlikely to happen, Peter. People always asking me this, but Mick and the current Uriah Heep, they go out and do their own thing, and I kind of said they don't really need an old fossil like me up there. They You can never say never, but it may happen somewhere. I don't know. That's in the lap of the gods.
It is. Well, never say never. Look, Paul, it's been a fascinating conversation. Everyone, Paul played on the foundation albums, as far as I'm concerned, of Uriah Heep. This is where it all started. And I really appreciate your time on Rock Daydream Nation and taking us down memory lane and these, a little bit of background with those 3 albums. So I wish you all the best, Paul, and thank you very much for joining me on Rock Daydream Nation.
No, thank you very much, Peter. It's been a pleasure. Very kind of you to ask me to do this. I do apologise for the technical problems we've had, but I guess that's that's 12,000 miles of technical, disruption.
Yeah, well, I'd love to speak to you again one day, and hopefully I can see you. I'm sure we'll arrange something.
Well, the visual thing, you probably won't miss it much.
I'll work on something. All the best, Paul, and that's Rock Daydream Nation.
Yeah,
Paul,
I'd like to say to all the Uriah Heep supporters out there, on behalf of the band, I thank you. We all thank you. Without you guys, we wouldn't be having conversations like this.
Absolutely. All the best, Paul.